80-ton stone giants guard a remote island, their journey a secret for centuries. How a society trapped on Easter Island moved statues the weight of a space shuttle is one of history's most captivating puzzles. By the end, you will understand the ingenious blend of engineering, culture, and sheer human will that made this possible. We will explore how oral traditions of walking statues led to revolutionary experiments, and why the answer may lie in a forgotten toolkit of ropes and physics. What does it truly take for a civilization to move a mountain of its own making? Its isolation is almost impossible to overstate. This island is a solitary speck of land, over 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited shore and 2,000 miles from the continental mainland. For the Polynesian voyagers who first arrived here, likely around the year 1200, this was a point of no return. They brought with them a package of life, chickens, sweet potatoes, taro, and the foundational knowledge of their seafaring ancestors. But once they landed, the ocean that had carried them became an uncrossable barrier. Every tool, every shelter, every hope for the future had to be carved from the island itself. This was not just a new home, it was a sealed world. The rolling green hills and the silent cones of extinct volcanoes were not merely a landscape, they were the entire universe of possibilities. From this limited palette, a society would paint a masterpiece of monumental ambition. The statues, the Moai, did not emerge from a place of limitless resource. They are the ultimate expression of a culture making the absolute most of what it had, turning volcanic rock into a legacy meant to stare across the generations. To grasp the sheer improbability of their work, you must first feel the weight of that silence, the immense quiet of an ocean stretching to every horizon. Their world was this island, and within it they decided to move mountains. These stone giants were never meant to be silent monuments. To the people who carved them, each one was Eringa Ora, the living face of a deified ancestor. They were far more than art, they were vessels of supernatural power known as mana. This sacred energy was believed to flow from the ancestors into the living world, offering protection, fertility, and strength to the island's clans. The statue was not a portrait of a person who was gone, it was an active, watchful presence. This belief transforms the entire story from a simple engineering challenge into a profound spiritual mission. Moving an 80-ton block was not just difficult labor, it was a necessary act of faith, a way to literally bring the protective power of the past into the heart of the community. Every detail of a Moai carried meaning. They were carved from the soft, compressed volcanic ash of the Rano Raraku quarry, a stone called tuff. Their elongated ears were a sign of high status, a marker of wisdom and listening. The distinctive red stone topknots or Pukao, which some statues wore, were made from a different volcanic rock called scoria, quarried from another site. Once completed, the Moai were carefully transported to ceremonial platforms known as ahu, which were often also tombs. And here is a crucial detail. They were almost always placed with their backs to the sea, their immense stone gaze turned inward, watching over the villages, the gardens, and the people. This orientation is everything. It tells us the statues were guardians. Their purpose was to use their mana to ensure the community's survival and prosperity. So when we ask how they moved these colossal weights, we are really asking something deeper. How does a society muster the will to accomplish the seemingly impossible? The answer begins with a why powerful enough to justify any how. The sacred duty to honor and harness the power of the ancestors provided a motivation stronger than any rope. This turns a logistical puzzle into a collective act of devotion, where every tug on a line was also a prayer. The sheer scale of the statues made their movement seem like a feat of pure myth, but in 2012, a team decided to test a story passed down for generations. Archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, working with National Geographic, listened closely to the island's oral traditions, which spoke of the Moai walking to their places of honor. What if this was not just a poetic metaphor, but a literal clue to a forgotten technique? Their experiment was deceptively simple. Using a concrete replica of a full-sized Moai, they attached 3 teams of strong ropes. One team pulled from the front to guide direction, but the real magic came from the 2 teams on either side. They pulled in a careful, alternating rhythm, rocking the giant statue from side to side. The statue's own design made this possible. Its curved belly and forward-leaning center of mass allowed each rocking motion to pivot it slightly forward. With each synchronized tug, the massive figure appeared to shuffle ahead, walking upright across the landscape. This method was surprisingly efficient, potentially requiring a coordinated group of just 18 people to move a multi-ton statue. It also offered a haunting explanation for the many Moai discovered toppled and abandoned along the ancient island roads. Perhaps during a walk, a rhythm was missed, a rope gave way, or the ground shifted, and the living face of an ancestor would fall, destined never to reach its sacred platform. The walking statue hypothesis did more than suggest a new method. It fundamentally changed how researchers viewed the relationship between legend and history. It showed that within the cultural memory of a people preserved in story could lie the precise engineering principles of their ancestors. The image of these stone giants shuffling rhythmically across the hills, guided by chants and ropes, transformed them from static monuments into dynamic participants in a grand ceremonial procession. This theory made the impossible feel vividly, tangibly possible. Yet, as with any good mystery, a single answer rarely satisfies everyone. For every elegant solution, new questions arise, and other researchers looked at the same evidence and saw a different path entirely. But the walking method was not the only idea to capture the imagination of researchers. For decades, the most widely accepted explanation was a far more grounded physical process. This was the sled and roller method. Imagine, if you will, a massive wooden sled cradling the recumbent statue, its runners gliding over a track of felled palm logs laid out like a continuous conveyor belt. Teams of workers would pull with ropes from the front, while others scrambled behind, retrieving the rollers that emerged from the back and rushing them to the front to extend the path. To reduce the tremendous friction, the ground or the logs themselves might have been lubricated with water, or perhaps with the slippery pulp of native plants. This technique feels intuitively right because we have seen versions of it across the ancient world, from the builders of Stonehenge to the engineers of the Egyptian pyramids. It leverages simple physics in a way that makes sense, and for Easter Island, the evidence seemed to be written in the landscape itself. When European explorers first arrived, they described the island as largely treeless, but core samples tell a different, older story. Once, this place was covered in a thriving forest of giant palm trees, a potential source of all the timber needed for sleds, rollers, and levers. The theory paints a picture of immense, coordinated labor, where entire clans would unite for the sacred task of moving their ancestral guardian. Yet, as compelling as this image is, practical experiments and deeper scrutiny have revealed significant cracks in its foundation. The first issue is friction. Even with lubrication, moving an 80-ton load on wooden rollers across miles of uneven terrain requires a staggering amount of force, likely necessitating a workforce in the hundreds. The second, more poignant issue is preservation. The delicate features of a Moai, its carved details and fragile neck, would be incredibly vulnerable to the constant jolting and shifting of a sled journey. But perhaps the most telling argument against this method is ecological. If moving just one statue consumed dozens of large trees as rollers, and the island is home to nearly 1,000 Moai, the math becomes devastating. This theory, in essence, requires the people to have literally deforested their own island simply to move their statues. It suggests a tragic paradox, a society so focused on its monumental spiritual project that it inadvertently destroyed the very environment that sustained it. This idea shaped the popular narrative of Easter Island for generations, a cautionary tale of ecological collapse. But is that the full story? Recent discoveries suggest the relationship between the people and their land was far more nuanced, and the true method of movement might have been born not from consumption, but from clever conservation. Yet another theory emerges from the world of shipwrights and sailors, offering a method of movement that is both brilliantly simple and remarkably controlled. It is called parbuckling, a technique traditionally used to roll heavy cylindrical objects like barrels or even capsized hulls up an inclined plane. Picture a statue lying flat on its back on a sturdy wooden sled. Now imagine a long, strong rope. One end is anchored to a fixed point far ahead on the intended path. The rope is then passed over the top of the statue and sled, looped underneath, and brought back to a large team of pullers standing at the front. When this team heaves on the rope, the loop tightens and rolls the entire assembly, statue and sled together, forward over itself. It is a continuous, incremental roll. With each synchronized pull, the massive load advances another few feet, the rope is reset, and the process repeats. This approach solves several critical problems at once. By rolling the load instead of dragging it, friction is dramatically reduced, requiring far less brute force. The statue's delicate base, which will be scraped and damaged in a pure drag, is protected because it is cradled and rolled. Most intriguingly, this method does not demand an endless supply of wooden rollers. It requires a strong sled, robust ropes, and coordinated labor, but it is far less demanding on the island's precious timber resources. It represents a kind of elegant frugality, a clever application of basic physics that turns a simple rope into a powerful mechanical advantage. This theory suggests the islanders were not just strong, but profoundly ingenious, adapting a principle from one domain, perhaps observed in moving canoes or supplies, to solve their greatest logistical challenge. It shifts the narrative away from a story of reckless consumption and toward one of intelligent adaptation, where innovation was born from necessity and a deep understanding of their material limits. Each of these theories, the walking statue, the sled and rollers, and the parbuckling roll, presents a different vision of the past. But to move from theory to truth, we need more than clever models. We need evidence etched into the land itself. The true power behind these theories lies not in wood or stone, but in fiber. Across every proposed method, from walking to rolling, one humble technology was indispensable: the rope. For the Rapa Nui, rope was not a simple tool. It was a masterpiece of engineering crafted from their environment. They likely used the tough, fibrous inner bark of the hau-hau tree, painstakingly processed and woven into cords of immense strength, or utilized other resilient native grasses. The creation of these ropes was a profound skill, requiring generations of knowledge to twist and braid fibers into lines capable of withstanding tens of tons of force without snapping. This was not a commodity, it was custom-made infrastructure. The length and durability needed were staggering. Imagine ropes as thick as a person's arm, stretching hundreds of feet, each one representing countless hours of skilled labor. But the magic was not just in the rope's strength, it was in its application. How these cords were attached and manipulated turned brute force into directed power. In the walking statue method, ropes acted as levers and stabilizers, their strategic placement on the statue's sides allowing teams to rock the giant with rhythmic precision. In a parbuckling or sled pulling scenario, the configuration of ropes determined how force was distributed. By using a series of hitches and loops, engineers could multiply the effective strength of the pullers, allowing a coordinated group of perhaps 50 or 60 people to guide a load that logically should require hundreds. The rope became a force translator, a system that took the collective effort of the community and focused it into a single, manageable point of action on the stone. This transforms our view of the operation entirely. Moving a moai was not an act of chaotic, straining manpower. It was a carefully choreographed performance of physics, where the placement of every knot and the angle of every pull was as calculated as the design of the statue itself. The rope was the silent conductor in this symphony of movement, the literal lifeline that connected human intention to monumental reality. Without this sophisticated understanding of materials and mechanics, the statues would have remained forever imprisoned in their quarry. The real monument, then, was not just the stone figure that arrived at the platform, but the invisible network of knowledge and cooperation that carried it there. Yet, even with the best ropes and the cleverest methods, the island itself presented the final and most formidable challenge, the very ground they had to cross. These ancient pathways are the island's memory made visible, radiating out from the volcanic slopes of the quarry like stone arteries. The roads tell a story of purpose and perseverance. They are not paved highways in any modern sense, but rather carefully prepared tracks, their surfaces cleared of major obstacles and sometimes subtly sunken or defined by lines of bordering stones. Their design is a direct reflection of the monumental task they served. Some roads run with an almost unnerving straightness, a direct line from creation to destination that suggests confidence and planning. Others curve gracefully to accommodate the natural rise and fall of the land, revealing a pragmatic flexibility. The very existence of these permanent routes tells us something profound. This was not a haphazard, one-time effort. The movement of moai was a sustained, generations-long tradition, and the roads are the physical infrastructure of that belief. They are the stage upon which the walking, rolling, or sliding of the giants was performed century after century. And on this stage we find some of the most poignant clues. Scattered along these roads, far from the quarry and not yet at their platforms, lie moai that never completed their journey. These fallen figures, resting on their sides or faces, are often interpreted as moments of tragic failure. Perhaps a rope gave way during a critical maneuver, or a support log shattered, sending the living ancestor crashing to the earth. In the cultural context of the time, such an event would have been more than a logistical setback. It could have been seen as a dire spiritual sign. A fallen moai might have been considered to have lost its mana, its sacred power, making its continued transport unthinkable. So it was left, a permanent marker of ambition interrupted. But these abandoned statues are not just monuments to accident. They are invaluable data points for archaeologists. Their position and orientation help researchers reconstruct the exact methods of movement. Was the statue face down, suggesting it fell forward from an upright walking position? Or was it on its back, as if a sled had tipped? Each fallen giant is a frozen moment in time, a snapshot of a process in motion. By studying the topography of the roads themselves, the gentle slopes, the sudden dips, the firmness of the ground, experts can model the immense challenges the movers faced. They can calculate the angles of descent, the points of greatest strain, and the likely routes chosen to avoid catastrophic failure. These silent, grassy tracks, then, are not empty. They are charged with the echoes of coordinated chants, the strain of ropes, and the collective breath of a society striving to connect with something eternal. They lead us to the final, and perhaps most critical, piece of the puzzle, the human community itself. For all the theories about ropes and rocking, the true engine behind this feat was the society that dreamed it into being. The statues themselves are a blueprint for their own journey. Look closely at a moai, and you see not just a sacred face but a carefully engineered object, every curve and angle shaped by the physical challenge of moving it. Their most famous feature, that pronounced forward lean, is not an artistic choice alone. It dramatically lowers the statue's center of gravity, shifting its weight forward and down, creating a stable, almost eager-to-move posture. This design is perfect for the walking method, allowing the giant to rock on its curved belly with a controlled pivot. That distinctive, heavy belly acts like a weighted keel, a ballast that prevents the statue from tipping too far backward during its rhythmic shuffle. Meanwhile, the broad, flat back of the Moai presents a smooth, uniform surface. If the method involved a sled or a parbuckling roll, this flat plane would be ideal, providing a stable, even area to lash the statue securely to a wooden cradle, minimizing any dangerous shifting during transport. Even the smallest details seem purposeful. The statues were carved with a temporary, detached base, a kind of stone keel that kept them upright in the quarry, but could be broken off once they were ready to travel, making that initial, crucial movement out of the volcanic rock socket far simpler. And look at the strong, undercut chin, a prominent ledge of stone. This could have served as a perfect anchor point for critical guide ropes, offering a secure hold for teams directing the statue's path without damaging the delicate facial features. This reveals a profound truth about the master carvers. They were not simply artists working in isolation. They were integral members of a grand engineering project, the first link in a chain of movement that stretched for miles. They knew, as they chipped away at the volcanic tuff, exactly what would come next. They were sculpting with the final journey in mind, embedding solutions to problems of weight, balance, and grip into the very form of their ancestors. The Moai, therefore, are a perfect fusion of faith and physics, where spiritual symbolism and practical necessity became one and the same. The sacred form was also the most transportable form. This deep, intentional design thinking forces us to ask an even bigger question. What kind of society could coordinate such a seamless collaboration between sculptor, engineer, and mover over centuries? The answer lies in the social engine that powered it all, a system of belief and belonging that turned monumental labor into a sacred privilege. Coordinating such a feat demanded a social symphony. Moving an 80-ton statue was a logistical masterpiece that required far more than strong backs. It required brilliant minds and flawless communication. This was not a random gathering of laborers, but a structured, hierarchical operation led by master engineers. These overseers, likely elders or specialists who had participated in previous moves, held a sacred and practical knowledge. They understood the precise angles for ropes, the timing for each rocking motion, and how to read the landscape to avoid hidden soft spots or sudden inclines. Their authority was absolute because a single misstep could mean a shattered ancestor and a spiritual catastrophe. Under their direction, the workforce was organized into specialized teams, some dedicated to pulling guide ropes, others to managing the rocking rhythm or resetting pathways, and a reserve group ready to leap in with wooden levers to correct a tilt. This level of organization turns the movement from a mythic struggle into a believable, repeatable process, a testament to the sophisticated social structure of the island's society. The rhythm of the work was everything. In the absence of modern signals, coordination came from sound, from the human voice itself. It is easy to envision a lead chanter calling out a steady, powerful cadence, a beat that every puller could feel in their bones. With each call, 50 or 100 arms would pull in perfect unison, then release, then pull again. This rhythmic chanting did more than keep time. It transformed exhausting labor into a collective ritual. It lifted morale, masked the strain, and connected every participant to the spiritual purpose of their task. They were not just moving a rock, they were escorting a divine ancestor to its home, and their synchronized effort was an act of worship. This shared experience, day after day, for a project that might take weeks, forged incredibly strong social bonds. Individuals became a single, living machine, their collective identity reinforced by the sacred nature of their goal. The successful movement of a Moai was a public demonstration of what the community could achieve when united, a powerful symbol of strength and harmony that benefited everyone. At the heart of this endeavor was a system of reciprocal obligation and prestige. Commissioning a Moai was the ultimate act of a chief or clan leader, a project that consumed vast resources, from feeding the workers to producing the miles of necessary rope. In return, the chief gained immense mana or spiritual power by successfully harnessing the protective force of the ancestors for his people. The community, in contributing their labor, were not merely subjects, they were active participants in a covenant. They gave their strength and time, and in exchange they received the promise of the ancestors' protection, the social cohesion of shared purpose, and likely communal feasts provided by the chief. This cycle of gift and obligation was the glue that held the project together. The statue itself, once erected, stood as a permanent monument to this social contract, a reminder of the chief's ability to mobilize his people and the people's collective power to shape their world. The true monument, therefore, was always the collaboration itself, the invisible network of trust and shared belief that made the impossible merely difficult. This understanding shifts the final question from how they moved the stone to why they eventually stopped. The island's ecology was the ultimate boundary of the possible. Every strand of rope, every wooden lever, every calorie of food needed to sustain the workforce came from this single, finite speck of land. Theories of statue movement cannot exist in a vacuum. They must be tested against the harsh reality of an ecosystem under strain. By the height of Moai construction, the landscape was undergoing a profound transformation. The vast forests of giant palm trees that once covered the hills were in serious decline. These trees were a vital resource, potentially used for canoes to access deep water fish, for timber to build homes, and yes, for the rollers and sleds that might have moved the statues. Their gradual disappearance created a powerful pressure, a scarcity that demanded a new kind of creativity. It is here that the walking method gains a compelling practical logic. A technique that required strong ropes woven from renewable plants but very little timber would have been a brilliant adaptation to a changing world. It suggests the islanders were not blindly consuming their environment, but rather innovating within its shrinking limits, finding ways to continue their sacred traditions with the materials they had left. This ecological pressure turns the story from one of pure triumph into a more complex dance between ambition and adaptation. The society was not separate from the island. It was in a constant, delicate negotiation with it. Every decision, from the design of a statue to the method of its movement, was filtered through the urgent question of resource management. The volcanic soil was fertile, supporting crops of sweet potato, taro, and yam, but feeding a large, organized workforce for weeks or months of transport was a monumental agricultural undertaking in itself. The community had to balance the spiritual imperative of moving ancestors with the daily imperative of feeding families. This tension reveals the true scale of their achievement. Moving a Moai was not an isolated project. It was the pinnacle of a functioning, integrated society that could marshal its farmers, its rope makers, its engineers, and its spiritual leaders toward a single, staggering goal. The environmental footprint of this endeavor is etched into the pollen records and soil layers. The decline of the palm forests coincides with the most intense period of statue construction and transport, suggesting these two great projects, the building of a spiritual landscape and the transformation of the natural one, were deeply intertwined. This leads us to a pivotal and often misunderstood chapter in the island's story. For generations, the dominant narrative was one of tragic collapse, a society that recklessly cut down its last tree to move its last statue, dooming itself to a grim fate. But this simple parable of ecocide is now being questioned by newer archaeological findings. the relationship between the people and their environment appears far more nuanced, a story of resilience and clever adaptation as much as one of hardship. The greatest challenge the movers faced was not a lack of will or skill, but the relentless, unyielding nature of the island itself, a finite stage upon which they performed an infinite drama of belief. Theories are compelling, but proof demands action. This is where the story of Easter Island's giants leaves the pages of history and steps onto the rocky soil of the island itself through the practice of experimental archaeology. It is a discipline built on a simple, powerful idea. To understand the past, sometimes you must try to rebuild it. Teams of researchers have not just studied the Moai, they have built their own. Using modern materials like concrete to replicate the weight and dimensions of a full-sized statue, they have staged elaborate physical tests on the very landscape where the originals once traveled. These are not mere demonstrations, they are rigorous scientific trials, complete with force gauges, motion sensors, and teams of volunteers whose straining muscles provide hard data. The now famous 2012 walking experiment, led by archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, was a landmark moment. By using ropes to rock a replica, they proved that a relatively small group could make a multi-ton statue appear to shuffle forward with a startling, almost graceful gait. But that was just one chapter in a longer book of field tests. Years earlier, in 1999, a Czech engineering team attempted a different approach, using a wooden sledge and log rollers to pull a concrete Moai. Their experiment provided crucial, if sobering, data on the immense friction and staggering manpower such a method would require, highlighting its practical difficulties. Each of these real-world trials measures something vital: the number of people needed, the achievable speed across different terrains, and most importantly, the physical stress on the statue itself. Would a particular method chip the delicate ear or snap the fragile neck? The replica becomes a diagnostic tool, revealing which techniques preserve the sacred form and which would have led to catastrophic damage. These experiments are not about declaring one single, universal truth. The Rapa Nui likely adapted their methods over centuries, using different techniques for different statues, terrains, and eras. Instead, experimental archaeology is about mapping the landscape of the possible. It defines the constraints the islanders worked within, the laws of physics and material science they could not break. By physically engaging with the problem, researchers experience the past challenges in their own bodies: the burn in the shoulders from a long pull, the critical importance of clear communication, the sudden heart-stopping tilt of an unbalanced load. This hands-on science is the closest we can come to a time machine, not for watching but for doing. It transforms abstract theories about ropes and rocking into a tangible, sweat and strain reality, forcing us to respect the ingenious minds who turned such immense effort into a sustainable tradition. For centuries, their history was written not in books, but in the living breath of their elders. While Western science meticulously uncovers physical evidence, the Rapa Nui people preserved the memory of the Moai through a different kind of record, one woven into stories passed carefully from one generation to the next. These oral traditions are a library of cultural memory, holding insights that stone and soil alone cannot reveal. Legends tell of the statues moving by the command of mana, that sacred supernatural force, or through the specific power of a priest named Pukao, who was said to possess the ability to make the great stones walk. For a long time, such accounts were dismissed by outsiders as poetic metaphor, beautiful myths with no basis in practical reality. But a profound shift has occurred in how researchers listen. The simple, resonant phrase, "the statues walked," is no longer seen as mere folklore. It is now recognized as a powerful piece of encoded history, a metaphorical clue pointing directly toward a real, physical technique. This represents a crucial bridge between two ways of knowing. When archaeologists like Hunt and Lipo designed their walking experiment, they were not just testing physics, they were heeding a story. They treated the oral tradition as a hypothesis, a starting point for scientific inquiry rather than its opposite. This integration of indigenous knowledge is vital because it offers a perspective that pure archaeology, focused solely on objects, might completely overlook. The stories provide the why that gives context to the how. They frame the movement as a spiritual act guided by revered figures, which aligns perfectly with the social coordination the task required. These traditions are not fairy tales. They are the accumulated observations of centuries of witnesses, distilled into a narrative form that ensured their survival. They tell us that the motion of the Moai was rhythmic, controlled, and almost alive, descriptors that perfectly match the side-to-side rocking of the walking method. Deciphering this code requires listening with respect, understanding that the people who built this legacy kept its essence alive in their collective memory long after the last statue was moved. The full truth of Easter Island is found not just by analyzing the fallen statues, but by honoring the stories that have always surrounded them, waiting for someone to understand their language. This partnership between trowel and tradition reveals a deeper layer of the mystery, showing how a society remembers its own greatness. The volcanic crater of Raraku is not just a place, it is a moment frozen in time. This vast, open-air workshop is the birthplace of every single giant, the unequivocal starting line for the entire transport mystery. Here, the soft volcanic tuff of the crater walls became the canvas for an entire civilization's ambition. Walking into the quarry today is like stepping into a workshop the artisans left only yesterday. Hundreds of moai in every conceivable stage of completion are still embedded in the rock faces, some just faint outlines emerging from the stone, others nearly free, staring sightlessly from the slopes. This is a fossilized snapshot of the carving process, offering a direct window into the methods and the monumental scale of the work. The first step was not a chisel, but a vision. Master carvers would select a section of the crater wall, perhaps marking the outline of a future ancestor with charcoal or a simple groove in the rock. Then teams of workers wielding toki, picks made from an even harder volcanic stone called basalt, would begin the arduous process of freeing the statue from the earth. They did not carve from the front, but from the sides, patiently undercutting the figure to create a hollow trench around it, leaving only a solid spine of rock connecting the statue's back to the mountain. This spine was the keel, the temporary anchor that held the giant upright and stable during its creation. Once the carving was complete, down to the last detail of the elongated ears and strong chin, the final dramatic act within the quarry began. Workers would focus on that keel, carefully chipping away at it until, with a decisive crack, the connection was severed. The multi-ton statue, now free, was ready for its first movement. The quarry's own design may have provided the initial assist. The interior slopes of the crater form a natural bowl, and researchers suggest the newly freed moai were likely lowered down prepared earthen ramps, perhaps using a system of ropes and leverage, to the crater floor below. Gravity here was not an enemy, but the first team member, helping to guide the ancestor onto the stage of its long journey. This controlled descent from the rock womb to the open ground was the prologue to the epic trek ahead, a rehearsal for the far greater challenges waiting beyond the crater's rim. These fallen giants along the ancient roads are time capsules of a journey interrupted. Each one tells a story far more complex than simple failure. A statue lying face down, its features pressed into the earth, suggests a catastrophic forward fall, perhaps during an upright walking motion when a guide rope snapped. Another found on its back, staring at the sky, might indicate a tipped sled or a controlled lowering that became permanent. Their orientations are like compass needles, pointing researchers toward the specific mechanics of the moment everything stopped. The wear on their bases becomes a kind of stone fingerprint, A statue dragged on a sled might show a smooth, polished underside, worn down by miles of friction. One that was rocked upright could reveal a distinctive pattern of chipping and abrasion concentrated on the curved belly and sides, the scars of its rhythmic shuffle. Even the soil itself holds clues. Archaeologists examine the compacted earth beneath a fallen moai, looking for parallel grooves that might indicate the path of log rollers, or a smooth, hard-packed surface consistent with a prepared track. This forensic analysis turns a silent field of stone into a vibrant, if tragic, crime scene of archaeology. But why were they left? The answer is likely a combination of the practical and the profound. A severe break, like a snapped neck, may have rendered the statue spiritually inert, its mana lost, making further effort unthinkable. Yet other abandonments seem tied to larger societal shifts. As internal tensions on the island grew, perhaps between competing clans, the collective will and manpower needed for such a monumental task may have simply evaporated. A community in conflict cannot pull together on the same rope. Alternatively, the sheer resource drain, the food and materials required to sustain the moving crews, may have finally reached a tipping point where survival priorities permanently overrode ceremonial ones. These fallen sentinels, then, mark more than a transport accident. They are physical monuments to a changing world, where the old ways of unifying the community around a single sacred goal became impossible to sustain. They are where the music stopped, leaving only the echo of the chant and the memory of what once moved. But the monument was not yet finished. With the great moai standing sentinel on its platform, the final act of this sacred construction could begin, one that required lifting a 12-ton stone hat to a height of over 30 feet. These are the Pukao, the distinctive red topknots carved from a different, lighter volcanic stone called scoria. Their fiery color was deliberate, a vibrant crown meant to symbolize the sacred status of the ancestor, perhaps representing a topknot of hair, a feathered headdress, or a woven basket of high rank. Moving these colossal cylinders, some taller than a person, was a second engineering masterpiece layered on top of the first. The challenge was twofold. First, to transport the Pukao from its own quarry at Pukao across miles of rugged terrain, and second, to somehow lift it and perfectly balance it atop the slender head of a statue that was already a miracle of movement. This was not an afterthought, it was the ultimate flourish, a declaration that the community's ambition had no ceiling. To solve the first problem, transport, researchers again looked to simple physics. Pukao's cylindrical shape is a massive clue. Unlike the rectangular moai, these stones are perfectly designed to be rolled. Imagine a giant stone barrel, perhaps lashed within a wooden frame for stability, being guided along a prepared road by teams with ropes. A method like parbuckling would have been exceptionally effective here, using a single long rope looped around the cylinder to roll it forward with controlled, incremental heaves. This would have been a noisy, grinding procession, a 12-ton red drum moving slowly across the island to meet its silent stone partner. Yet, arrival at the Ahu presented the true test of ingenuity. How do you lift such a weight to such a height without modern cranes? The most widely accepted theory involves the ancient world's universal tool for elevation, the ramp. Archaeologists propose that once the Pukao was rolled to the base of the Ahu, workers would construct a massive earthen ramp against the platform's front, piling soil, rocks, and rubble to create a gradual incline that rose to the level of the statue's head. This ramp itself was a monumental undertaking, requiring the movement of hundreds of tons of fill material. Then, using ropes, levers, and sheer coordinated effort, the team would painstakingly haul or roll the Pukao up this temporary mountain. The final maneuver, balancing the cylinder on the statue's narrow pate, would have required millimeter precision and nerves of steel. A slight miscalculation could send the topknot crashing down, damaging the moai below or injuring the workers. Success, however, completed the living face of the ancestor, uniting earth and sky, body and symbol in a single, awe-inspiring figure. The Pukao operation reveals something profound about the Rapa Nui vision. They did not stop at the hard part. They pursued a total aesthetic and spiritual completeness, undertaking an entirely separate, complex logistical campaign just to add the final, perfecting detail. This sustained commitment, this refusal to cut corners even after the primary miracle was achieved, speaks to a culture operating at the peak of its creative and organizational power. The red crown was not just decoration, it was a signature. Easter Island's challenge was not a solitary one. Across the globe and throughout time, other civilizations stared down the same fundamental problem: how to move the unmovable. By looking at their solutions, we see the Rapa Nui not as an isolated mystery, but as brilliant participants in a universal human endeavor. Take the ancient Egyptians, master builders of the pyramids. To transport the massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 2 tons, they employed wooden sledges. Wall paintings show teams of laborers dragging these sledges across the desert. Researchers believe they likely poured water on the sand in front of the sledge runners, a clever trick that dramatically reduced friction. The damp sand formed a firm, slick surface, turning a grueling drag into a more manageable pull. This principle of reducing resistance through lubrication is a direct parallel to theories about lubricated log rollers on Easter Island. It is a shared insight into basic physics, discovered independently by cultures separated by an ocean and millennia. Far to the north, the Neolithic builders of Stonehenge in Britain performed a different kind of megalithic marathon. The smaller blue stones at the site, weighing up to 4 tons each, were quarried from mountains over 150 miles away. The prevailing theory suggests they were transported part of the way by water, using rafts along the Welsh coast and up rivers. But for the overland segments, the method likely involved a familiar toolkit, a sledge or a cradle placed atop a track of greased wooden logs. Teams would have hauled the stones with ropes, constantly recycling the logs from the back to the front in a slow, rolling procession. This image of coordinated teams moving stones across vast green landscapes is hauntingly similar to the scene we must envision on Easter Island's ancient roads. It speaks to a common human response, using the materials at hand to create a temporary, moving pathway for the sacred stone. High in the Andes Mountains, the Inca civilization demonstrated another facet of megalithic genius. Their structures, like the famous walls of Sacsayhuaman, are made of enormous, irregularly shaped stones that fit together with breathtaking precision without mortar. To move these multi-ton blocks, the Inca used a combination of manpower, ropes, and earthen ramps. But their most distinctive technique involved a profound understanding of stone itself. They would shape the blocks by pecking at them with harder stones, slowly refining the fit. To move them, they might have used log rollers, but they also likely employed a method of rocking and levering, using wooden poles to inch the stones forward across a prepared bed of smaller stones or clay. This patient, incremental approach, focused on control and precision over raw speed, mirrors the careful, rhythmic rocking proposed for the walking Moai. It highlights how different environments, from mountain slopes to volcanic hills, inspired different applications of the same core principles. From these scattered corners of the ancient world, a powerful pattern emerges. While the specific tools varied, the foundational strategies were universal. First, a deep, practical understanding of friction and how to defeat it with water, grease, or rolling logs. Second, the masterful organization of human labor, turning individual effort into synchronized, multiplied force through coordination and leadership. And third, a clever use of the landscape itself, whether building ramps, following riverways, or preparing level roads. This global perspective reframes Easter Island's achievement. The Rapa Nui were not magical outliers. They were exemplary problem solvers whose solutions sit proudly within a grand, human tradition of collective ingenuity. Their isolation makes their success more striking, not more mysterious. With no outside influence to copy, they independently arrived at the same elegant conclusions about physics and cooperation that other great cultures did. This shared legacy of moving mountains, quite literally, reveals something fundamental about us. When driven by a powerful shared purpose, whether to honor ancestors, please gods, or unite a community, human societies repeatedly find a way to translate vision into reality, one heavy, deliberate step at a time. The true power that raised these giants was not found in ropes or ramps, but in an invisible force that shaped the entire society. This was the concept of mana, a sacred and supernatural energy that flowed from the deified ancestors into the world of the living. In the Polynesian worldview, the well-being of the community, the fertility of the crops, the success of the fishing, and the strength of the people all depended on maintaining a strong connection to this ancestral power. A clan leader's most vital role was to act as a conduit for this mana, securing its blessings for his people. This belief system was the spiritual engine that made the impossible not only conceivable but utterly necessary. Commissioning and successfully erecting a moai was the ultimate public demonstration of a leader's sacred connection. The statue itself was a permanent receptacle for that ancestor's mana, a battery of spiritual power placed to watch over the village. Its size and grandeur were direct reflections of the leader's status and the potency of the lineage he represented. A larger, more imposing moai on a prominent Ahu platform was a bold statement of spiritual and political authority. It declared, "Our ancestors are powerful, and through me, their power protects and provides for us all." This created a powerful incentive that sustained the monumental effort across generations. The work was not a fleeting vanity project. It was an investment in the community's very survival and cosmic standing. The immense logistical operation, feeding hundreds of workers, producing miles of rope, and dedicating months of labor, was therefore a societal imperative. It was the price of maintaining cosmic order and social stability. In this light, the statues were not merely monuments. They were the most critical infrastructure imaginable, more vital than any road or granary. They were the spiritual power grid of the island, and moving them into place was the sacred work of connecting the entire community to the source of its life and identity. This profound motivation helps explain the sheer endurance required. When the work was hardest, when ropes burned hands and progress was measured in inches, the pullers were not just moving stone. They were participating in a ritual that secured the future for their children, guided by the unwavering belief that their collective strain was weaving a protective cloak of mana over their entire world. The statue's journey was in every sense a pilgrimage. Yet the physical world has its limits. To truly understand the forces at work, researchers now step into a digital laboratory where entire landscapes and statues can be built from lines of code. This is the realm of modern computer simulation, where tools like finite element analysis allow scientists to test every transport theory without ever touching a stone. Imagine being able to apply virtual ropes to a perfect digital model of a moai, then watch in slow motion as the forces ripple through its structure. These programs can calculate the exact strain on the statue's fragile neck during the rhythmic rocking of the walking method. They can map the pressure points where a wooden sled would press against the statue's back, revealing where cracks might begin to form. They can even simulate the complex forces involved in a parbuckling roll, showing how the statue's weight shifts and where the risk of a catastrophic tumble is highest. The power of this approach lies in its precision and its safety. By inputting precise data, the exact density of the volcanic tuff, the estimated tensile strength of how fiber rope, the composition of the ancient soil, researchers can run thousands of virtual trials in an afternoon. They can ask what-if questions that would be far too dangerous or destructive to attempt in the real world. What if the ground was 10% softer on that slope? What if the pulling team lost rhythm for just 3 seconds? The simulation provides answers, highlighting which methods are mechanically plausible and which would almost certainly have led to the damaged statues we find along the roads today. This high-tech detective work does not replace the value of physical experiments or the wisdom of oral tradition. Instead, it acts as a powerful bridge between them, offering a new kind of evidence. It allows researchers to digitally eliminate methods that the physics simply will not allow, narrowing the field of possibilities. The computer becomes a time machine for stress, showing not just what could have been done, but what likely was done based on the enduring evidence left behind in the stone itself. This digital lens reveals that the true genius of the Rapa Nui engineers may have been an intuitive understanding of these very forces, a knowledge carved not in code, but in the successful journey of hundreds of giants across their island home. Every elegant theory faces the hard scrutiny of evidence. The captivating image of statues walking upright across the island, for all its intuitive appeal, is not without its critics. Skeptical researchers point to the statues that have been examined, noting that the distinctive, polished wear patterns expected from constant rocking on a stone base are not found on every moai. If this was the universal method, they argue, why don't we see more consistent damage? This critique suggests the walking method might have been one tool in a larger toolkit, perhaps reserved for certain parts of the journey or for statues of a specific shape, rather than the sole solution for every giant. The debate turns on these fine details, a testament to how seriously the academic community now takes this once fanciful idea. Similarly, the traditional sled and roller theory remains under a shadow for its environmental cost. The image of an endless consumption of precious timber, rolling an 80-ton load over a path of logs that would be crushed and discarded, paints a picture of staggering resource use. Given what we know about the island's fragile ecosystem and the eventual decline of its forests, this method can seem almost reckless. Could a society that depended so intimately on its environment for survival have sustained such a wasteful practice for centuries? The ecological timeline makes many archaeologists doubt it, pushing them to seek solutions that required less from the land and more from human ingenuity. This friction between theories is not a sign of failure, but of a field maturing. The most compelling modern perspective is not one of a single, secret technique, but of a flexible, adaptive strategy. Think of the master movers not as followers of one rigid dogma, but as pragmatic engineers. A smaller, lighter moai might have been walked easily across flat ground. A larger, more fragile one might have been carefully cradled on a sled for a treacherous downhill section. The final approach to the Ahu platform, requiring precise positioning, may have involved a completely different set of levers and ramps. The true genius may have been their ability to read the challenge, to assess the statue, the distance, the terrain, and the available materials, then choose and even combine methods accordingly. This multi-method approach feels deeply human. It is how we solve complex problems even today. The healthy, ongoing debate among researchers serves a vital purpose. It prevents us from settling for a simple, satisfying story and pushes us toward a richer, more nuanced truth. Each critique forces a refinement, a new experiment, a deeper look at the archaeological record. It reminds us that the people of Easter Island were not a monolith acting the same way for 1,000 years. They were a dynamic culture that innovated and adapted. The mystery persists not because we lack answers, but because each proposed solution peels back a layer to reveal a deeper, more fascinating question about human capability. What we are left with is not a single secret, but a profound respect for a society that could hold multiple solutions in mind, applying them with a skill so seamless that its details vanished into the success of the work itself. This leaves us at the edge of the quarry, looking at the most poignant symbols of all, the giants that never left. The immense project of moving the Moai was a cultural crucible, forging the very identity of the Rapa Nui people. For generations, this shared sacred labor acted as a powerful social glue. It demanded and rewarded cooperation, creating a society of specialists, from the master carvers in the quarry to the rope makers, the chant leaders, and the engineers who read the landscape. Successfully transporting an ancestor to its platform was a public triumph that reinforced the chief's spiritual authority and validated the community's collective strength. This cycle of ritual labor and successful outcome built a profound sense of cultural pride and unity, a feeling that they could literally shape their world. The statues lining the coast were not just guardians, they were proof of what they could accomplish together. Yet, this monumental focus also cast a long shadow. The very system that unified them became a heavy, constant demand on their most finite resources, both material and social. The need for timber, for rope fiber, and most critically, for vast amounts of food to sustain the non-farming workforce, placed an escalating strain on the island's ecosystem. The narrative that emerges is not one of sudden catastrophe, but of a slow, relentless tightening. As the great palm forests receded, the choices became harder. Could they spare the wood for sleds or rollers, or was it more urgently needed for canoes to reach deeper fishing grounds? Should they dedicate more land to communal feasts for the movers, or to family gardens for basic survival? The act of moving the statues, which began as an expression of abundance and faith, gradually became a test of diminishing returns. The society's incredible ability to organize around a single goal eventually met the unmovable boundary of the island itself. The energy required to lift an 80-ton ancestor into place was energy not spent adapting to a changing environment. This mounting pressure did not immediately shatter the culture, but it began to bend it. The unifying spiritual project that had defined them for centuries started to fracture under the weight of scarcity. The signs of this shift are etched in stone. In the later centuries, the rhythm of creation and transport slowed, then stopped entirely. The quarry fell silent, with statues left half-carved in the rock. More tellingly, the sacred guardians themselves became targets. The very Moai that had been objects of veneration were systematically toppled, breaking at the neck as they were pushed forward from their platforms. This was not an act of random vandalism, but a deliberate cultural revolution. It symbolized the overturning of the old order, the rejection of the ancestor-based power structure that had demanded so much from the people and the land. The society's energy, once channeled into cooperative construction, turned inward, likely toward competition and conflict over what resources remained. The story of moving the statues is therefore a profound parable about balance. It reveals how a civilization's greatest strength, its unifying cultural ambition, can also become its most vulnerable point when the environment that supports it can no longer bear the load. The fallen Moai are not merely symbols of a collapse, but monuments to a difficult transition, a society painfully recalibrating its relationship with its past, its leaders, and its fragile island home. The silent giants that survived centuries now face a quieter, more relentless challenge. The very elements that shaped them, wind and rain, are slowly wearing their features smooth. Each footprint of a tourist venturing off the path, each shift in the global climate that brings stronger storms, adds incremental pressure to these ancient guardians. Preserving them is no longer about solving a past mystery, but about securing a future. Modern conservation has moved away from intrusive methods like pouring concrete, which can trap moisture and cause more damage. Instead, international teams, often led by Chilean and Rapa Nui experts, employ subtle, non-invasive science. They use ground-penetrating radar to see inside the platforms without digging, and applied gentle chemical treatments to strengthen the porous stone against lichen and erosion. The goal is not to restore the moai to a fictional perfection, but to stabilize them against time, allowing the natural patina of age to remain as part of their story. This work recognizes that the greatest threat to a monument is not always a sudden collapse, but the slow, unnoticed fade. Every scan and careful brushstroke is an act of defiance against that fade, a promise to the past. But this physical work is only one part of the preservation story. The more profound shift is in who holds the pen that writes the next chapter. For generations, decisions about the moai were made by distant academics and governments. Today, through hard-won local governance, the Rapa Nui people are reclaiming their role as the primary stewards of their heritage. They are central to every choice, from managing tourist access to approving research projects. This is not merely administrative, it is a restoration of a sacred relationship. It acknowledges that the statues are not just relics to be studied, but living ancestors to be cared for. This collaborative model reframes the entire endeavor. The legacy of the moai transforms from an archaeological trophy into a living cultural treasure, a continuous thread connecting the ingenuity of the past with the responsibility of the present. Understanding how they were moved is no longer an academic endpoint. That knowledge directly informs how we protect them. Knowing the precise composition of the volcanic tuff helps conservators choose compatible strengthening agents. Mapping the ancient roads teaches us where modern foot traffic will cause the most harm. The same deep reading of the landscape that guided the original engineers now guides their preservation. This turns every act of care into a dialogue across time. We are not just fixing stones, we are honoring the same social contract that built them, a covenant between a people and their place in the world. The lesson here extends far beyond the island's shores. It is a masterclass in sustainable stewardship, showing that true preservation balances science with spirit and protection with respect. It asks us to see heritage not as a static object behind glass, but as a dynamic responsibility. The ultimate goal is elegantly simple: to ensure these silent giants continue their eternal watch, not as prisoners of a forgotten past, but as guides for a more thoughtful future. Their continued presence on the horizon is a testament to a new kind of movement, not across land but across generations. Even with a convincing picture of how they moved, the moment of their final ascent remains a stubborn puzzle. Placing an 80-ton statue, often over 10 feet tall, perfectly upright onto its stone platform, the Ahu, was the ultimate act of precision engineering. This was not a slow, incremental journey. This was a singular, high-stakes lift. The most widely supported theory involves a technique as old as civilization itself, the ramp. Researchers propose that once a statue was maneuvered to the base of its Ahu, workers would construct a massive earthen incline against the platform's front. This temporary mountain, built from soil, rubble, and stones, would rise at a shallow angle to the height of the statue's intended perch. Using a system of ropes from above and levers from below, teams would then painstakingly inch the recumbent moai up this slope, a grueling process of pull, lever, and reset that could take weeks. The final maneuver, pivoting the giant from a horizontal to a vertical position on its narrow platform base, would have been the most delicate of all. A slight miscalculation in balance could send the ancestor crashing down, undoing years of work. Success, however, locked the guardian into place for eternity, its back to the sea, its gaze fixed over the community it was built to protect. This method, while logical, leaves little physical evidence, as the ramps would have been dismantled after use. Their existence is inferred from the sheer impossibility of the task without them, a silent testament to a final, vanished structure. The island's geography was not just a backdrop, it was an active participant in every journey. The volcanic landscape, with its rolling hills, sudden ravines, and soft soil patches, dictated the very paths the statues could take. Researchers now believe the ancient roads were not arbitrarily chosen, but meticulously planned to exploit the easiest terrain. They often follow natural ridgelines which provided firmer ground and avoided swampy lowlands. The slopes were calculated, perhaps never exceeding a certain gentle grade that a team could manage without losing control. This suggests the movers possessed an intimate, generationally inherited knowledge of their land's subtle contours. They knew which valleys held firm rock beneath the grass and which hillsides were too unstable for a multi-ton load. The routes were a dialogue between human intention and geological reality, a negotiation that shaped the island's sacred geography as much as the statues themselves. Uncovering these precise pathways is where 21st century technology enters the story. Modern archaeologists are no longer limited to what they can see on the surface. Using tools like LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map the ground beneath vegetation, and ground-penetrating radar, they are revealing a hidden network of roads and work sites invisible to the naked eye. These digital surveys can detect the subtle depressions of sunken roads, the patterns of disturbed soil where a statue might have been temporarily rested, and even the outlines of long-vanished wooden structures. Each scan is like turning on a light in a dark room, showing us that the landscape we see today is just a palimpsest with the true map of the past written just beneath our feet. Every year, the soil itself gives up new secrets. An archaeologist's trowel might uncover a small, broken basalt pick, a toki discarded along a transport road. This fragment is more than a tool, it is a timestamp, placing a human hand at that exact spot centuries ago. Soil analysis can reveal microscopic pollen grains, telling scientists what plants grew in the area when the road was active, painting a picture of the ancient environment. Even the chemical composition of the earth can show traces of human activity, like elevated phosphate levels from organic waste, hinting at where work crews might have camped and eaten during the long haul. These are the quiet, unglamorous pieces of the puzzle, but they are indispensable. They ground the grand theories in tangible, physical proof. They remind us that this was not a mythic event performed by giants, but a human endeavor filled with broken tools, meal breaks, and problem-solving on the fly. Each tiny discovery, a charcoal fleck from an ancient fire, a chip of red scoria from a Pukao, is a direct connection to the minds and muscles that performed this work. They transform the mystery from an abstract intellectual challenge into a collection of countless personal moments, now silent but still echoing, and so the field remains vibrantly alive. For every question we answer about the Moai, two new, more nuanced ones seem to emerge. Were the transport methods uniform, or did they evolve dramatically over the centuries as resources changed and knowledge deepened? Did each clan develop its own slight variations, its own engineering traditions passed down through specific families? The discovery of a new road fragment or a previously unknown quarry site can overturn decades of assumption, sending researchers back to their models and maps. This is the beautiful, endless nature of a deep historical mystery. It refuses to be solved completely. It ensures that Easter Island and its stone giants remain not a closed case in a history book, but a perpetual conversation between the past and the present. The fascination endures because the story is not about a single secret technique, but about the boundless capacity for human ingenuity when driven by a shared, sacred purpose. The true legacy of the Moai is not that they were moved, but that we are still moved by the question of how, forever drawn to the silent testimony of these giants and the resilient society that dared to make them walk. Perhaps the most powerful answer is that there never was just one answer. The Rapa Nui were not searching for a singular secret to move their ancestors. They were building a living, evolving toolkit of solutions. Their true genius lay not in a rigid formula, but in a profound and pragmatic versatility. Think of them not as followers of a single instruction manual, but as masterful engineers reading the landscape and the statue before them, choosing the right tool for the exact challenge at hand. A smaller, more stable moai on a firm, flat plane could have been elegantly walked upright with ropes, its rhythmic shuffle a ceremonial procession in itself. Yet that same method might have been far too risky for a colossal 80-ton giant on a steep, winding descent. For that challenge, a different approach would be needed. Perhaps they carefully lowered it onto a massive wooden sledge, using a controlled system of ropes to navigate the tricky slope, a method that prioritized security over speed. Or maybe they employed the parbuckling roll on certain inclines, using the statue's own cylindrical base and gravity to their advantage, turning a difficult pull into a manageable, incremental roll. This multi-method perspective resolves so many of the long-standing debates. It explains why the wear patterns on fallen statues are not all identical, and why oral traditions might speak of walking while archaeological evidence suggests sledges. Both can be true, just at different times and for different monuments. This adaptability speaks to a deep, cumulative intelligence, a body of knowledge that was passed down and refined over generations. As the island's environment changed, with forests thinning and resources shifting, their methods would have evolved in response. A technique that required abundant timber in one century might have been adapted or replaced in the next by one that relied more on clever ropework and human coordination. Their pragmatism was their greatest strength. They were exquisitely attuned to their world, understanding that the goal, the sacred placement of the ancestor, was absolute, but the path to get there could have many routes. This view transforms the mystery from a search for a lost trick into a celebration of a society's holistic brilliance. The real secret was their ability to see the entire problem, the weight of the stone, the lay of the land, the strength of their community, and to synthesize a new solution from the materials and knowledge they had. It was a dynamic conversation between culture and environment, where faith provided the unwavering why and versatile, adaptive ingenuity provided the ever-evolving how. The silent guardians of Rapa Nui have given us their final lesson, one that echoes far beyond their volcanic shores. Their story is not a simple tale of a clever trick with ropes, but a profound testament to the power of a united community driven by a sacred purpose. We see a civilization that looked at an 80-ton block of volcanic rock and did not see an impossibility. They saw the living face of an ancestor, a vessel for the spiritual force that would protect their families and bless their land. This unwavering why forged the incredible how. It mobilized generations of carvers, rope makers, engineers, and pullers into a single, living machine. The true monument was never just the statue that arrived at the coast, but the invisible symphony of cooperation that carried it there, a harmony of faith, physics, and sheer human will. While the precise sequence of chants and the exact configuration of ropes may be lost to time, the evidence they left behind is undeniable. It shows us a people of brilliant adaptability, likely using a versatile toolkit of methods, walking some statues, rolling others, and always reading the landscape with an intimacy we can only now begin to map with our lasers and computers. Their achievement stands as a timeless mirror, reflecting our own capacity for greatness when we are united by a shared vision. Yet, in that same reflection, we also see the delicate line they walk. Their monumental ambition existed within the finite circle of a tiny, isolated island. The very resources that fueled their spiritual project, the trees, the soil, the communal labor, were not endless. Their story thus becomes a dual legacy, a breathtaking example of human ingenuity and a poignant reminder of the need for balance. It asks us what we choose to move and at what cost. The Moai do not whisper a single secret of transport. They speak in an enduring voice about the heights we can reach together and the profound responsibility we hold to the world that sustains us. If this journey into one of history's greatest puzzles resonated with you, there are countless more mysteries waiting to be explored. Subscribe to continue unraveling the past with us, and share your thoughts below. Which theory of moving these giants speaks most powerfully to you?